She wrote a children's book about grief, about a little boy who loses his father, about learning to find him in the wind, in the sunlight, in the quiet moments of an ordinary day. She published it a year after her husband died. She went on local television to promote it. She smiled for the cameras, and the whole time, while she was writing about grief, while she was talking about helping children process loss, while she was presenting herself to the world as a devoted mother doing something beautiful in the aftermath of tragedy, investigators were quietly building a case that would end with her in handcuffs, because the grief she wrote about was grief she caused, and the father in that book was a man she allegedly poisoned with 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl. This is the case of Kouri Richins. Eric and Kouri Richins lived in Kamas, Utah, a small town nestled in the mountains east of Salt Lake City, the kind of place where people know their neighbors and life moves at a slower pace. Eric was 39 years old. He ran a successful stonemasonry business. By all accounts, he was a hands-on father to their 3 young sons, ages 5, 7, and 9 at the time of his death. He coached sports. He showed up. He was, by the picture that emerged later in court, exactly the kind of father that children's books about grief are written for. Kouri was a real estate investor who flipped houses. She was driven, ambitious, someone who wanted more. More money, more success, more of everything. On the surface, they were a successful couple. Nice house, 3 kids. A life that looked, from the outside, exactly like it was supposed to look. But underneath that surface, things were falling apart in ways that neither the neighbors nor the children could see. Kouri had a secret. She had been having an affair with a man named Josh Grossman, a friend of the family and a veteran who had served in Iraq. The messages between them that prosecutors later showed to a jury were not the messages of 2 people having a casual relationship. They were the messages of someone who wanted out. Kouri told Grossman she felt trapped. She told him she wanted to leave Eric. She told him, in words that would later be read aloud in a courtroom, that she wanted a future with him. She also had a financial problem. Despite the appearances of success, Kouri was deep in debt, millions of dollars in obligations that Eric did not fully know about. She had been moving money in ways that obscured the true picture of where things stood, and at some point, she began researching life insurance. In the months before Eric's death, Kouri took out several insurance policies on his life. One of them she allegedly obtained through fraudulent means, forging documents to increase the payout. The total value of those policies at the time of Eric's death was more than $2 million. $2 million. 3 young boys. A secret affair. Millions in debt. The motive, when investigators eventually laid it out, was not complicated. On the night of March 3, 2022, Kouri made Eric a drink. A Moscow Mule. Vodka, ginger beer, lime. She told him it was to celebrate a recent success in her real estate business. They toasted. Eric drank. A few hours later, Kouri said she went to sleep in one of the boys' rooms because their son was having nightmares. When she returned to the master bedroom around 6 in the morning, she said she found Eric unresponsive in their bed. She called 911. Paramedics arrived. Eric Richins was pronounced dead. He was 39 years old. The initial investigation treated his death as potentially accidental. Fentanyl overdoses had been killing people across the country at epidemic rates, and at first glance, this looked like it could be another tragic case. But there were details that didn't sit right. Eric Richins had no history of drug use. People who knew him, friends, family, colleagues, said he simply wasn't someone who used drugs, let alone fentanyl. And the autopsy results, when they came back, revealed something that changed everything. Eric had not just traces of fentanyl in his system. He had 5 times the lethal dose. 5 times. That is not an accidental amount. That is not someone who took something they didn't know was laced. That is a quantity that ends a life with certainty, and investigators knew it. But there was something else. Something that happened approximately a month before Eric died, on Valentine's Day. The same date, 1 year later, that Kouri would be convicted of attempting to kill him for the first time. Prosecutors alleged that on Valentine's Day 2022, Kouri had tried once before. A sandwich, laced with fentanyl, given to Eric. He survived that first attempt. He didn't know what had happened. He probably just felt sick or off and chalked it up to something else. He had no reason to suspect his wife of trying to kill him. A month later, the drink was more carefully prepared. The dose was 5 times what a human body can survive. As investigators dug deeper into the circumstances of Eric's death, pieces began connecting that Kouri could not have anticipated. The fentanyl had to come from somewhere. It didn't materialize out of thin air. Prosecutors eventually traced it to a woman named Carmen Lauber, someone who sold Kouri the pills she used to poison her husband. There was also Kouri's behavior in the aftermath of Eric's death. While most spouses in the immediate aftermath of losing a partner are consumed by shock and grief, Kouri was making financial moves. She filed claims on the insurance policies. She pursued Eric's estate. She sued the estate for assets she claimed she was owed under their prenup. And she wrote a book. Are You With Me? Was published on March 5, 2023, exactly 1 year and 1 day after Eric died. It told the story of a young boy learning to cope with the death of his father, learning to find his father's presence in the wind and the sunlight and the small moments of daily life. It was marketed as a grief resource for children. Kouri went on local television to talk about it. She talked about loss. She talked about helping her sons heal. She smiled for the cameras. She was arrested 3 months later. On May 8, 2023, investigators came for Kouri Richins. She was charged with aggravated murder, attempted aggravated murder, forgery, and fraud. The details of what prosecutors had assembled, the financial motive, the secret affair, the insurance policies, the traced fentanyl, the 2 separate poisoning attempts, became public almost immediately, and the reaction was immediate. The image of a mother who had written a children's grief book about her murdered husband's death, while that murder was still under investigation, captured something that pure crime cases sometimes don't. It wasn't just the killing. It was the story she built around it, the performance of grief, the book, the television appearance, the public face of a devoted widow, while behind that face, investigators were quietly, methodically assembling the evidence that would take her apart. The trial began in February 2026. It lasted 13 days. More than 40 witnesses took the stand. The jury heard about the secret messages to Josh Grossman. They heard about the millions in debt. They heard about the forged insurance documents. They heard from the woman who sold Kouri the fentanyl. They heard about the Valentine's Day sandwich. They heard the autopsy results, 5 times the lethal dose, a number that sat in that courtroom like a verdict of its own before the jury ever deliberated. They heard something else, too. During a conversation with Grossman shortly after Eric's death, Kouri had asked him something that the jury clearly found memorable. She asked him, having learned he was a combat veteran, what it felt like to kill someone. The jury deliberated for just over 3 hours. They came back with a verdict on every count. Guilty of aggravated murder, guilty of attempted aggravated murder, guilty of forgery, guilty of fraud. On May 13, 2026, what would have been Eric's 44th birthday, Kouri Richins stood before a judge for sentencing. She was handcuffed. She wore a neon green shirt. She addressed her 3 sons, who had submitted written statements to the court saying they would feel unsafe if she were ever released. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Before the sentence was handed down, Eric's sister stood and spoke about what had been taken. Not just Eric's life, but his sons' lives. 3 boys who would grow up without their father, who would grow up knowing their mother had taken him from them, who would now grow up in the care of relatives while their mother sat in a prison cell for the rest of her life. Eric's 3 sons are not props for some twisted children's book about grief and loss, she said. And yet, that is what they've been reduced to. 3 boys, 5, 7, and 9 when their father died. A book written to help children understand grief, written by the person who caused it. A drink made to celebrate success, made by the person who needed his death to achieve it. And somewhere in Utah, 3 young men who will carry this story with them for the rest of their lives. The story of a father who was loved, and a mother who chose $2 million over him, and a book about grief that turned out to be the most disturbing piece of evidence in the whole case. Not because it confessed anything, because it proved she could perform innocence perfectly while carrying guilt that most people couldn't imagine. Kouri Richins is in prison for the rest of her life. The book still exists. You can still find it online. Eric Richins was 39 years old. this case is solved. If you want real disappearances, solved cold cases, and true crime investigations based on actual events, subscribe to Vanished Records and join us for the next case. There are things about this case that don't let go easily. The first is the book itself. Most people who commit crimes and then perform grief do so privately. They put on a face for the people around them. They say the right things. They attend the memorial. Kouri Richins went further. She sat down and wrote. She created something designed specifically to help children cope with losing a parent. She packaged her performance of grief into a product. She put her name on it. She promoted it on television. The audacity of that act, if prosecutors are right about what she did, is almost impossible to process. Not because killers don't lie. They do, constantly. But this was something more deliberate. This was someone constructing a permanent, public record of her innocence in the form of a children's book, while the man she allegedly killed was still fresh in the ground. The second is what happened on Valentine's Day. The first poisoning attempt, the sandwich, happened on the most symbolically loaded day of the year, a day built around love, around celebrating the person you chose. Prosecutors alleged that on February 14th, 2022, Kouri Richins gave her husband a sandwich laced with fentanyl. He didn't die. He recovered, probably without ever knowing what had happened. He went on loving her. He went on trusting her. He went on being a father to their sons. And 4 weeks later, she tried again. This time with a drink, this time with 5 times the lethal dose. The third detail is what her son said in court. Children who have lost a parent to violence sometimes speak at sentencing in ways that are quietly devastating, not through dramatic speeches, but through the simple act of stating what is now true. Each of Kouri's 3 sons submitted a statement saying they would feel unsafe if their mother were ever released. These are boys who were 5, 7, and 9 when their father died. Boys who have now grown up enough to understand what happened, to understand what their mother did, to stand before a court and say clearly, "We do not want her to come home." That moment, 3 sons asking a court to keep their mother in prison, is the part of this story that doesn't resolve into anything clean. There is no framing that makes it okay. There is just the reality of what happened, a family that cannot be put back together. 3 boys who lost both parents in different ways on the same night in March 2022, and a courtroom on what would have been their father's 44th birthday where the last pieces of this story were finally, formally, put in place. Kouri Richins will die in prison. Eric Richins was 39 years old when he died on a night he thought was a celebration, and the book is still out there.